Have you ever wondered what it's like to walk into a world that everyone else knows, but you've never seen from the inside? That night, Priscilla found herself standing at the threshold of Graceland, a place both magnificent and intimidating, a home that seemed more suited for legends than for a 17-year-old girl clutching a tiny piece of her past. She could still feel the smooth paper of the program she had brought from Germany, folded carefully in her hands, the last link to a world she was leaving behind. It trembled slightly as she gripped it, though she barely noticed, too focused on the man stepping toward her. Elvis Presley moved down the staircase with a quiet kind of authority, not the commanding presence that made stadiums roar and millions scream, but something far more human. His blue robe brushed the floor, catching the golden glow from the chandelier above, and for the first time, Priscilla noticed a vulnerability behind the calm eyes, a shadow of hesitation she had never imagined. He stopped at the bottom of the stairs and looked at her, really looked like he was measuring if the space between them could hold what was about to happen. "You came," he said softly, almost as if admitting it to himself. And that admission, simple as it was, carried a weight she hadn't expected. It made her chest tighten, and in that moment, she realized that the night she had imagined in her mind was about to become something entirely different, something far deeper than the fanfare of concerts or the glare of the cameras. Her mind raced. Why did he look almost afraid? Why did the corridors of Graceland, familiar yet alien to her, feel like they were listening? And most of all, what was the truth hidden behind the closed doors of this house, the rooms that no visitor ever saw? She couldn't answer any of those questions, and the fact that they lingered in her mind made the anticipation almost unbearable. Elvis gestured toward the living room, where the golden light softened the edges of the grand piano and the long white couch. "Sit," he said. His voice wasn't loud, it didn't need to be, and as she walked over, her eyes traced the details, the polished floors reflecting every flicker of light, the faint shimmer of a lamp in the corner, and the subtle hum of the house itself. She could hear the distant shuffle of footsteps deeper inside, faint but purposeful, as she wondered if someone else was watching, waiting, knowing exactly what this night was about to become. She lowered herself onto the couch, hands still clutching the program, and Elvis sank into the seat beside her, close enough to feel the warmth of his shoulder, but far enough to respect some invisible boundary. There was a silence that wasn't empty. It was dense, almost tactile. It carried the weight of years she could never have imagined, the burden of a life constantly observed, and the hidden loneliness of a man who had never been allowed to simply be himself. "You must think this place is a lot," he said, eyes glancing around the room, a trace of amusement softening his features. "It's beautiful," she said, her voice small, hesitant, "but it feels loud, even when it's quiet." He laughed quietly, a tired, familiar sound that somehow carried warmth. "That's Graceland. Even the walls don't sleep." And that was when the first true question formed in her mind. If the walls themselves held memories, what memories were waiting for her tonight? She felt her pulse quicken, and even though the room seemed welcoming, there was a tension she couldn't shake, as if this house had been waiting for someone like her to understand it. Elvis leaned back slightly, one knee drawn up, and studied her as if she were a photograph from another life he hadn't realized he had been missing. "You've grown," he said, and there was a complexity in his tone that made her glance down, almost shyly. "More than I expected." "I didn't expect it either," she whispered, half smiling. His eyes softened, and in that moment, Priscilla realized something vital. She wasn't just a visitor here. She was being invited into something intimate, fragile, a version of Elvis that no one else ever got to see. The thought was thrilling and terrifying at once. She noticed the subtleties, Vernon appearing quietly in the doorway, the men in the hallway exchanging looks, the faint shuffle of someone's shoes just out of sight. And for a moment, a prickly question surfaced. Why did everyone seem so tense about her being here? Was there something she was not supposed to see, something no one dared to let escape? Elvis broke her train of thought with a small motion, a hand lightly tapping the program she still clutched. "Holding on to that for luck?" he asked. She laughed softly, almost to herself. Maybe, or maybe it's easier than letting go. And in that brief exchange, she glimpsed the part of him that was human, not a star. There was relief in his eyes, a rare softness, and she realized that the object she considered trivial, a small paper program, was the first symbol of trust between them. A gesture, quiet and unassuming, that hinted at the intimacy yet to come. He stood, almost silently, and began walking toward the piano. "I want to show you something," he said, and there was a gravity in his voice she hadn't expected. Her curiosity spiked. What could possibly lie in a house she already thought she understood, in a room she hadn't even known existed? And why did it feel like whatever he was about to reveal might change everything? As they approached a door at the end of a long corridor, newly painted and bearing the faint scent of polish, she felt a thrill mixed with fear. "Elvis, what is this place?" she asked, her voice barely audible. He paused, hand resting on the door, eyes closed for a fraction of a second. "Every man's got one room he can't control," he whispered. And for the first time, Priscilla felt the weight of a secret so heavy it seemed to vibrate through the floorboards. The questions multiplied in her mind. What was inside? Why had he waited for her to arrive to show her? And could she bear to see the parts of a man the world had never known? She swallowed hard, her hands tightening around the program, as the door opened slightly, revealing a narrow, quiet space that seemed to breathe with anticipation. And in that instant, before she could even step inside, she realized the three open mysteries she had come to witness. The hidden fear in Elvis's eyes, the intentional watchfulness of the house itself, and the truth that this night would not simply be another encounter. It would be a revelation. Priscilla had always imagined meeting Elvis as something out of a dream, a collision of worlds so different that she wasn't sure which side she belonged to. Germany had been her cocoon, a place where her voice was quiet, her thoughts carefully tucked away in diaries, her insecurities hidden behind polite smiles. Yet even there, across the Atlantic, she had felt him. Elvis, the boy with sorrow in his eyes, writing letters that carried more than just words. She remembered the first one she had received, its edges frayed from being read and reread, the ink slightly smudged from tears she suspected were his. It had seemed impossible then that anyone so famous could feel so painfully alone. And yet, here she was, walking the hallways of his home, carrying the folded program like a talisman against disbelief. The corridor leading from the living room felt narrower than it looked on paper. Each step echoed softly, a subtle rhythm that seemed to carry its own story, each creak of the floorboards like a whisper of memory. She noticed the faint gleam of his polished shoes as they passed over the wooden floor, and for a moment she imagined him younger, sitting on the edge of that same floor in Germany, guitar across his knees, eyes distant, lips moving silently with unspoken songs. She wondered if he remembered those nights as vividly as she did. Nights when he had leaned too heavily on his own thoughts, and she had listened too deeply, afraid to speak but unwilling to let him feel completely alone. Elvis stopped near a small framed photograph on the wall, one she hadn't noticed in all the grandeur. It was him, barely 20, in his army uniform, eyes carrying that same weight she had come to recognize. "I wrote to you because I needed to tell someone," he said softly, almost hesitant, "someone who wouldn't laugh, who wouldn't judge. You're the only one who listened the way I needed." Her fingers unconsciously tightened around the folded program in her lap. That little paper, insignificant to anyone else, had become the thread connecting their worlds. She realized as she watched him that it had always been more than a gesture of nostalgia. It was proof of trust, a quiet symbol that reminded her that even a king could be fragile. Even the man who shook stadiums could crave a witness. And yet, even in this intimacy, the house remained alive, aware. From the deeper halls, she heard the soft shuffle of footsteps, distant but deliberate, as if someone, or something, was moving with purpose. She hadn't yet dared ask, but she couldn't ignore the question forming in her mind. Who else knew the truths hidden behind these walls? And why did they move so carefully, as though afraid to disturb the unseen pulse of Graceland? Elvis motioned for her to sit beside him again, this time near the piano. The instrument gleamed under the lamp's warm glow, and she could almost see him playing there for hours in Germany, alone, the music a balm and a confession all at once. I didn't want anyone to see me like that, he confessed quietly, his voice threading through the room like a secret. Not my letters, not the nights I stayed awake, not the moments when I thought I'd break. She could feel the fragility of the man beneath the legend. It wasn't the vulnerability of a boy lost. It wasn't the kind of vulnerability the public could sympathize with. This was heavier, older, a weight accumulated over years of expectation, of performance, of never being allowed to simply breathe. The folded program in her hands shivered again, and she realized she was holding on to more than paper. It was a lifeline to their shared past, a tangible reminder that she had been part of his quiet, unseen world long before the cameras and spotlights ever demanded him. She thought about the letters he had written, the confessions he had entrusted only to her, and she felt a pang of awe. How many people could see the world through the eyes of someone so revered and still understand the human beneath? You must have wondered, he said, eyes flicking to hers, what it was like the world I left behind. Germany. The nights I stayed awake, thinking maybe I wasn't enough, maybe the world would forget me before I even began. She nodded, her heart tightening. I did, but I also saw the man who kept trying, the man who kept writing even when it hurt. He smiled faintly, that same tired, familiar warmth touching his lips. You don't know how much that meant. To know someone saw me as me. Not Elvis Presley, not the star everyone else screamed for. And then, almost imperceptibly, his gaze drifted to the long hallway they had walked down moments earlier. A question bubbled up in her mind, one she dared not voice yet. What parts of this world were meant to stay hidden? Was there a room, a drawer, a recording, a moment he hadn't shared with anyone else? She caught herself wondering if the shadows in the hallway might be holding secrets she wasn't ready for, yet could not look away from. The room seemed to lean in closer as he spoke, each word more intimate, more revealing. There are nights I still feel lost. Nights when I remember Germany, when I think about my mother and all the things I couldn't say. And sometimes I wonder if anyone else could ever understand it. The folded program pressed between her fingers. She felt a strange blend of hope and sorrow. She realized that the fragility of this moment was exactly why it mattered. She remembered the tiny, trembling moments in Germany, her own uncertainties, his confessions and letters, and she saw them mirrored here in the dim light of a home that contained both grandeur and solitude. And yet, as they sat in that living room, a quiet tension threaded the air. Somewhere down the hall, she heard the faint echo of another's steps, deliberate, measured. She could feel the weight of an unseen presence, and another question slipped into her mind. If this man, so trusted, so open with her, had corners of his life no one else could see, what would she discover tonight? Would she see the part of him even he tried to hide? Elvis leaned slightly closer, lowering his voice, and she realized the subtle command embedded in it. Stay. Listen. Witness. I don't know how many people could understand all this, but I hoped you would, he said. And in that hope, she felt the unspoken promise, the invitation into a world few ever entered, a world defined by trust, by shared silence, by the acknowledgement of humanity beneath fame. That night, in the quiet of Graceland, the first open loops of her curiosity deepened. What was the secret room he hadn't shown her yet? What had he been trying to protect from the world, and from her? And most dangerously of all, could she bear to see the man behind the legend? She clutched the program, small and unassuming, yet brimming with significance, and felt a tentative courage rise. Whatever was ahead, whatever she was about to witness, she knew she couldn't turn back. She was no longer just a visitor. She was part of a story that would change everything. Her, him, and the quiet corridors of this extraordinary home. And then, just as she was about to ask her first question, Elvis rose, moving toward a door she hadn't noticed before. Painted fresh, with a faint sheen reflecting the chandelier's light, it seemed almost out of place, waiting for something or someone. "I want to show you something," he said quietly, his tone carrying gravity she hadn't expected, a hint of hesitation underlined with inevitability. And as she followed, heart pounding, she realized that nothing in Germany, nothing in letters, and nothing in her imagination had prepared her for what lay beyond that door. The door opened into a room that felt both familiar and impossible. The air inside seemed heavier than the hallways, carrying the weight of years of secrets, the sort of weight that pressed softly but persistently on the chest. Priscilla stepped in, her heart skipping a beat. She had imagined grandeur, extravagance, maybe even a studio filled with trophies and lights. But this was different. Sparse, intimate, almost sacred. And there, in the center, sat a single spotlight aimed downward, cutting through the dimness like a question that demanded an answer. Elvis walked to it first, the glow brushing his face, highlighting the lines that fame had etched, the faint shadows beneath his eyes that no makeup or camera could hide. His hand lingered near a scarf draped casually over the chair, a scarf she remembered from Germany, the one he had left behind during a night too long and too lonely to recount fully. It had been a thread between them, a small symbol of the boy who had trusted her with fragments of himself. And now, in this room, the scarf waited as if it too carried a story, a silent witness to what was about to unfold. He gestured for her to sit near the edge of a worn chair, the folds of her dress brushing against the polished wood. She noticed the faint shuffle of papers on the desk. Tapes, letters, photographs, all remnants of private confessions. And then, in the corner, a small reel-to-reel tape machine sat, blinking faintly, a promise of revelation. She hadn't seen anything like this in Germany, hadn't imagined that the man who could command stages with tens of thousands of voices under his spell had moments so raw, so human, so unshielded. Elvis picked up the scarf, running his fingers over the fabric, eyes distant. "I kept this," he said quietly, "because it reminded me of nights I thought I'd lose myself entirely. And somehow, I didn't." His voice carried both pride and fragility, a mixture that made her chest ache. She realized this was not a man performing. This was a man wrestling with his own past, his own shadow, right in front of her. A sudden noise from outside, the muffled sound of someone pacing, made him pause. He didn't look frightened, but wary, protective. The hallway seemed alive with tension, almost as if the house itself was aware of what was happening. She sensed a question forming in the air. Who else had known? Who else had ever glimpsed this side of him? But before she could even voice it, he lowered the scarf onto the chair and pressed play on the tape machine. The room was suddenly filled with the sound of his voice, different, stripped of bravado. Not the commanding tone of the king, but the quiet, trembling voice of a man unsure if he would ever be enough. I can't let them see me like this," the voice said, a younger version of him speaking, afraid and raw. "I don't know if I'm strong enough to carry this anymore." Priscilla's grip tightened on the edge of her chair. She felt her own breath catch as the room seemed to contract, each word resonating like a drumbeat inside her chest. The spotlight above cast his shadow long against the walls, splitting him in two, the public man and the private man. And here she was witnessing both. Then came the moment that drew gasps from the invisible crowd of memory. The tape continued. "I miss home. Not the stage, not the lights, not Graceland, but home. My mother, the laughter, the chaos, the small things that meant everything." The voice trembled with grief that no amount of fame could soothe. Priscilla felt tears sting her eyes. She realized she was holding the folded program tighter, the mini symbol from Act 2 anchoring her, connecting her to him, to that trust, to the world he allowed her to see. Elvis leaned forward, his own eyes glossing over, lips pressed in a line he rarely allowed anyone to notice. The scarf on the chair, the folded program in her hands, the tape machine, these were more than objects. They were markers of life lived in silence, small proofs of a heart that bore more than anyone could imagine. And in that room, everything converged: grief, memory, vulnerability, and awe. A sudden sound, faint applause, maybe imagined, maybe a memory of a cheering crowd, shifted the room. For a moment, it felt like the public was there, witnessing, yet silent, restrained. The juxtaposition of the roaring world outside and the intimate confession inside made her stomach churn. Could the world ever understand this side of him? Or was it a secret meant only for her, for this space, for this night? Then, abruptly, the tape mentioned someone else, someone he had hurt, someone he feared he'd lost forever. Priscilla leaned in closer, her pulse quickening. The voice whispered, "Tonight, I pushed someone away. I said things I didn't mean. I acted like I didn't care." The words were not just confessions. They were a storm breaking, a moment of unmasking. She wanted to ask, to clarify, but the intensity of the room held her silent. Elvis's hand hovered near the tape machine, reluctant to stop it. His eyes found hers, an unspoken question lingering. "Can you bear this?" And without thinking, she nodded ever so slightly, almost imperceptibly. She wanted to see him in full truth, in the unfiltered reality behind the legend. The tape went on, recounting nights of loneliness, uncertainty, and the crushing weight of expectation. "What if they don't love me when they see who I really am?" the voice asked. And suddenly, Priscilla felt the gravity of her own question from earlier, the question that had been forming since Act 1, now echoing louder. Who is this man when the world isn't watching? And can anyone stay when the real him is revealed? Her eyes caught the scarf again, the thread of Germany connecting past and present. She realized that everything, the letters, the tapes, the folded program, was a conversation, a silent dialogue between him and her across time, across distance. And as the tape ended, the room returned to quiet, the echo of his words lingering like a soft ghost. Elvis finally spoke, voice breaking the silence, quieter than any stage whisper could ever be. "Not many get to see this. Not many, I trust." And the intensity of it struck her. She wasn't just a guest. She was a witness, a keeper of a fragile truth. The major symbolic anchor of the night, the scarf, the spotlight, the tape, was now fully revealed. A marker of trust, of confession, of the vulnerability behind the myth. And the open loops from Act 2 were deepening. The hidden room, the shadows in the hall, the fragments of a past he had never allowed anyone to touch, now all converged here. And then, almost imperceptibly, another question crept into her mind. What would he show her next? What part of Elvis had yet to be revealed, beyond grief, beyond memory, beyond the tapes and letters? She didn't yet know, but the pull was irresistible. Whatever lay beyond that door, whatever truth remained hidden, she had to follow. Because in that moment, amidst the shadows, the tape, the scarf, and the spotlight, she understood the unspoken rule of his world. Only those who stay see him fully. Only those who witness the private moments understand the man behind the king. And she had chosen to stay. The door clicked softly behind them, shutting out the tape machine, the scarf, the spotlight. And for the first time that night, a hush fell over the room. Not the hush of expectation, but the hush of relief and quiet reverence. Priscilla stepped back slightly, brushing a strand of hair from her face, noticing how the dim light of a single bulb flickered over the polished wood of the floor. Elvis sank into a chair, slumping as if the weight of the confession had finally been released from his shoulders. She hesitated, unsure whether to sit beside him or let him have a moment alone. But the room seemed to invite her in, not as an observer, but as a companion. A glass of water sat on the low table, untouched. She picked it up, offering it to him. His hand trembled slightly as he accepted it, the simple act of drinking grounding him, reminding him that even the strongest man needs something small to steady himself. I never show that side to anyone," he admitted softly, voice low, almost hesitant. "Not even in Germany. Not even to the ones who thought they knew me." He paused, staring at the faint reflection in the water, as though seeing the younger version of himself. The boy from Tupelo, the soldier, the rising star, all blending into one fragile figure. Priscilla leaned closer, careful not to crowd him, but close enough to bridge the space that fear had created between them. Then, why now? She asked quietly, almost whispering. Why show me all of that? He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached for the folded program she had held since Act 2, the tiny symbol of the world she had left behind. He traced its edges, a faint smile tugging at his lips, nostalgic in its simplicity. Because, he finally said, I wanted to see if someone could stay, even after they knew the truth. Her heart constricted. The thought of someone leaving, once the man behind the legend had been revealed, was something she had felt before, but now, it was here, in this quiet, breathing room, and it wasn't about herself. It was about him, the weight he carried, the vulnerability he dared to show. Outside, the faint shuffle of footsteps echoed in the hallway. Not threatening this time, not tense, but present, reminding her of the first open loop from Act 1. Who else watched, who else knew, and what was expected to happen next? Priscilla realized that this moment, the fragile intimacy, was theirs alone, for now. Elvis took a slow sip of the water, then set it down with a soft clink. He exhaled deeply, the sound of years of pressure escaping in one breath. It's hard, he admitted, to let anyone see the parts that aren't perfect. But maybe perfection isn't the point. His eyes flicked toward her, searching, vulnerable, yet steady. She reached out and touched his hand briefly, a reassurance, a tether. You're allowed to be just you, she said softly. Not Elvis Presley. Just you. He looked at her then, really looked at her, and for a fleeting moment, the world outside, the cameras, the fans, the legend, vanished. Only the quiet hallway, the soft bulb light, the tiny ripple of her presence, and the echo of his own voice remained. And in that pause, a small understanding settled between them. The open loop of whether she could stay, the question of witnessing him fully, the fragility he had carried alone, all found a tentative answer in the simple, shared silence. For a moment longer, they remained there, not speaking, letting the hush of the room cradle them. The glass of water reflected the dim light like a small symbol of clarity and grounding amid the turbulence of the night. And somewhere, beneath the weight of the secret rooms, the tapes, and the spotlight of memory, a new truth was emerging. That intimacy wasn't loud. It didn't demand attention. It simply existed quietly, profoundly, and irrevocably. The faint glow of the hallway light spilled into the private room, stretching long shadows across the floorboards. Elvis's fingers rested lightly on the edge of the table, tracing the outline of a handkerchief, soft, worn, and familiar. It wasn't just any handkerchief. It carried the faint scent of his mother's perfume, a fragment of memory he had kept close for years, almost like a talisman. Priscilla watched him carefully, sensing that the next moment could tilt everything. There was a pause, heavy, almost unbearable, where the only sound was the quiet hum of the old tape machine cooling down and the occasional creak of the house settling. I haven't told anyone this, he said, voice low, almost trembling. Not my manager, not the band, not even my father. But tonight, you're the first person who might understand it. Her heartbeat quickened, and instinctively, she leaned closer. What is it, Elvis? He reached under the table, pulling out a worn, leather-bound notebook. Its edges were frayed, the spine creased from years of private confessions. These are letters I wrote to myself, he said, almost whispering. Things I couldn't say out loud. Things I couldn't risk the world seeing. Priscilla glanced at him, realizing that this was more than vulnerability. It was the unveiling of the soul. Why now? She asked softly. Why show me all of this? Elvis hesitated. His eyes flicked to the handkerchief again, then to the faint glow of the hallway. Because I needed to know if someone could see me and still stay. And maybe, he paused, swallowing, maybe because I can't carry this alone anymore. Then he opened the notebook, revealing pages filled with small, precise handwriting, songs that never made it to record, confessions that never reached anyone, memories preserved like fragile glass. One page caught Priscilla's eye immediately, a letter dated the night after his first performance in Vegas. His words were raw. The loneliness, the pressure, the fear of losing himself beneath the glittering image. Before she could speak, he spoke again. That night, I made a mistake. I pushed someone away, someone I should have held on to. Her fingers brushed against his as she instinctively reached to steady him. "Oh," she asked, almost whispering. "My mother," he said, voice breaking. She's gone. And I kept parts of me hidden because I didn't think anyone could handle them." The single guitar note from the living room drifted faintly into the hallway, soft and tentative, as if echoing the ache in his confession. The sound made the walls seem to breathe along with them, amplifying the weight of truth now shared. Elvis reached for the handkerchief again, pressing it briefly to his eyes, as if to wipe away both tears and years of silence. The gesture was intimate, private, and heavy with unspoken words. Priscilla didn't pull back. Instead, she let her hand rest lightly on his shoulder, a tether to reality, to trust, to the moment that had finally arrived. Then came the revelation that had been building since Act 3, the truth that would shift everything. The tapes, the letters, the confessions. They weren't just memories. They were a plea, a desperate attempt to reconcile the man the world demanded with the human he was beneath it all. "I wanted to hide it," he said, almost apologetically. "The pain, the fear, the fact that I sometimes break. But you've seen it, and you stayed. And that's more than anyone has ever done." A wave of understanding swept through her, mirrored by a sudden swell of applause from somewhere distant. Perhaps a rehearsal, perhaps memory, but it felt like the world itself was acknowledging the truth he had long carried alone. Priscilla's eyes glistened. She reached for his hand, feeling the tension release slowly, the tight coil of anxiety unwinding into something quiet and solid. "You don't have to be alone anymore," she whispered. He looked at her, really looked at her, and in that moment, the second open loop, the question of whether someone could remain through his truth, through his raw self, was answered. She hadn't run. She had stayed. Elvis exhaled slowly, allowing himself a faint, tired smile. "It's funny," he said softly. "All my life I thought people wanted Elvis Presley, the king, the showman, the image. But maybe what I needed was just someone to want me." The handkerchief fell lightly from his hands onto the table, symbolizing a release, both literal and metaphorical. The faint strum of the guitar carried over, a whisper of continuity, connecting past memories, confessions, and the first fragile moments of trust between them. And somewhere, in the quiet aftermath of revelation, the room seemed to shift. The shadows no longer felt heavy, the hush no longer stifling. Instead, it was a sanctuary, a private cathedral built from trust, honesty, and shared vulnerability. Priscilla finally spoke, her voice soft but steady. "I see you, Elvis. Not the legend. Just you." And for the first time that night, he believed it. Not just in words, but in the simple, undeniable reality of presence, witness, and acceptance. The hallway outside remained quiet, yet somehow the world felt larger. The tapes, the letters, the confessions, they were not just echoes of the past anymore. They were bridges connecting a man to someone brave enough to remain. The spotlight that had haunted him since Act 3, symbol of expectation, scrutiny, and relentless pressure, now felt distant, softened, a memory fading behind the present intimacy. And with that, the scene closed on the turning point. A man revealed, a woman steadfast, and a truth so raw it reshaped everything that had come before. The living room felt different now, almost breathing with them. The heavy shadows from earlier had softened, replaced by a warm glow spilling from the chandelier above. The faint echo of applause from a rehearsal long ago seemed to linger in the corners, blending with the quiet hum of Graceland'S evening. Elvis stood near the piano, his gaze drifting to the scarf he had worn during countless performances, Act 3's symbol of identity, pressure, and vulnerability. He picked it up, letting the fabric slide through his fingers. It wasn't just a piece of cloth. It was a memory of every moment he had balanced fame with fear, Every night he had hidden behind it, every heartbeat he had tried to shield from the world. Priscilla watched him, noticing how he held it differently now. Not as a barrier, not as a shield, but as something almost sacred, a reminder of the journey he had carried alone and the trust he had finally allowed her to witness. "You remember this?" she asked quietly. Elvis nodded, voice soft but steady. "Every night it reminded me who I had to be, but tonight, I see I didn't have to be that alone." The room, once heavy with expectation, now carried the gentle warmth of understanding. The first open loop, the question of whether someone could truly see him and still stay, was now answered. Priscilla hadn't just stayed, she had become the quiet anchor in the storm of his life. He set the scarf aside and walked to the doorway, where the fading spotlight of the hallway caught the edge of his hair and the soft lines of his face. It wasn't the glaring stage spotlight that had haunted him for years. This was quiet, almost shy, as if even the light itself wanted to witness this newfound clarity. Elvis turned to Priscilla. "You stayed," he said, his voice carrying pride more than relief. "Through everything, the letters, the tapes, the mistakes I made, you stayed." She smiled, the soft curve of it full of warmth and understanding. No words were needed. The simple act of being present had spoken louder than anything else. He lifted his eyes to the piano again. The faint strum of a guitar echoed from somewhere deep within the house, unplanned but perfectly timed, a whisper of the past joining the present. It reminded him of the solo nights, the quiet rehearsals, the small moments before the world demanded him. Elvis exhaled, letting the air fill the space around him. "Maybe this is what I needed all along," he murmured. "Not applause, not adoration, just someone who saw me and stayed. And maybe that's enough to keep going." The faint hum of the house seemed to agree, wrapping the room in a soft embrace. For a moment, time itself paused. No stage lights, no screaming fans, no deadlines. Just a man, a woman, and the echoes of a journey finally understood. He recalled the tapes once more, the confessions he had played for her. They had been heavy, raw, and unfiltered, a mirror of his soul. Now, their weight felt lighter, as if the act of sharing them had turned them from burdens into bridges. Bridges to understanding, connection, and legacy. The fading spotlight on the hallway seemed to draw attention one last time, illuminating the corridor they had walked together. It was a reminder that the journey wasn't over, but the heaviest part, the isolation, the fear of being seen, was behind him. The symbol from Act 3, once a marker of vulnerability, had become a testament to resilience. Elvis turned to Priscilla again, eyes reflecting both pride and gratitude. I think I can finally carry it," he said softly. "Not alone, but with someone I trust." Priscilla's hand found his again. No words were needed. The quiet warmth of that contact, the soft echo of the room, and the gentle memory of applause were affirmation enough. And as the house settled into night, the sense of legacy wasn't in the gold records or the fame. It was here, in this fragile, human moment. A man who had carried too much alone finally allowed himself to be seen. A woman who had chosen to stay finally became witness to truth. Somewhere, perhaps in memory or in the quiet of the hallway, the faint hum of a tape machine lingered, a subtle echo of the night when Elvis's world, his heart, and his humanity were first fully revealed. This was the legacy that mattered, not the spotlight or the music, but the courage to let someone in. And in that, both of them found something neither had expected: peace. Years later, when people spoke of Elvis and Priscilla, the headlines always tried to simplify what had never been simple. They focused on the glamour, the Vegas lights, the gold suits, the screaming crowds. But the moments that mattered most, the ones that shaped everything, happened quietly. In hallways and hidden rooms, where no cameras dare to follow. In moments when a man set aside the world's expectations and allowed himself to be human. The faint memory of that night lingered like a soft echo of applause, fading, gentle, intimate. Elvis didn't need to perform for anyone. He didn't need the world to cheer. He only needed someone to see him, really see him, without judgment. And Priscilla had been that someone. It was a lesson not just for fame, but for life itself. Behind every icon, there's a heartbeat that sometimes trembles with doubt. Behind every legend, there's a fragile soul that longs to be understood. And behind every superstar, there's a moment, one quiet, private, invisible moment, that explains everything. Priscilla remembered the lamp in the small room, the software of the tape machine, the gentle hum of the house settling into night. She remembered the way he let the scarf fall, the spotlight fade, and the silence breathe. And she realized something important. Love, trust, and human connection endure far beyond applause or legacy. Elvis had shown her that vulnerability wasn't weakness. It was courage. That admitting fear, pain, or longing could create bridges instead of walls. And that staying through the moments others might flee could define a lifetime of meaning. As the final echoes of that night faded into memory, Priscilla carried with her the truth that the world rarely saw. A son missing his mother, a man burdened with a kingdom of expectation, a heart that loved too much, and a soul that kept giving even when it hurt. And somewhere, in the corners of Graceland, if you listen closely, you can almost hear it, the faint fading applause memory of a night when a superstar let someone witness the man beneath the legend. That sound is a reminder that legacy isn't built only on fame or fortune, but on the moments we dare to be real. Some moments are lightly dramatized for narrative effect. And maybe, just maybe, stories like these remind us that love, music, and memory never fade. If this touched your heart, share it and subscribe for more.